what I see that these boys really want more than anything is acceptance and to be allowed to make mistakes, to be guided and held through those experiences. A lot of these young men are pushing back because they feel like they're constantly being watched or surveilled, and they just want to have that ability to go and explore and push boundaries. They really want to be able to explore and to be trusted to explore and to make their mistakes and to be trusted that they'll learn from their mistakes. If you tell a young man that you can't do this and you can't do that, he's going to try and do it anyway. I feel like being supported in making those mistakes and taking those calculated risks, learning through the discomfort or the failures or the falls, knowing that your parent is still going to be behind you. I think we'd rather have a generation of young men who are willing to take risks and are willing to explore and push through into discomfort rather than a generation of young men who are so scared that they don't try anything.
Welcome to the Heart of Man podcast, a podcast for any man seeking to live in alignment with his deepest core and lead a life of profound meaning and connection. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and I'm here to empower you through transformative conversations, eye-opening insights, and practical wisdom. Join me now as we venture into the heart of man. Let's dive in. Aaron Binning is an experienced social worker, educator, and youth mentor originally from the UK. For a number of years, Aaron put his focus towards supporting at-risk young people, gaining invaluable first-hand experience, training, and qualifications along the way. Driven by his passion for creating positive change, Aaron came to Bali at the beginning of 2020. This is where he created The Road, an initiative aimed at empowering and educating young men through experiential learning. Through his work, he aims to enable young men to embark on a transformative journey of self-discovery, allowing them to understand themselves, their peers, and the world around them. Aaron's vision is to equip young men with life lessons and skills through guidance that many of us missed out on. He firmly believes in the importance of human connection through self-expression and vulnerability, recognizing that the cultivation of these skills are often missed. Now, these past few months, I've been connecting with a number of men who are fathers of young boys, and it got me thinking, what can we do in order to effectively allow our boys to transition into maturity and manhood? What is it that I and many of my fellow men missed out on that left a lasting impact on us? And so with that, I wanted to engage in a discussion. Now, for anybody who's not a parent nor a young man moving through adolescence, my hope is that we still get to use this conversation as an access point to reflect on our own lives and past experiences. And in my own exploration of what was absent during my own upbringing and the impact this may have had on me, I found these explorations to be empowering as it offered me the opportunity to intentionally provide myself with the things that I lacked. For parents of young men, I hope this can illuminate an understanding of what may be present for them and how you may be able to support them. Before we begin, I want to humbly name that both Aaron and I are not fathers, and neither of us want to assume to have any of the answers here, but the intention was to simply begin with a conversation, especially with Aaron's vast experiences of working with young men. And now, without further ado, let's dive into this conversation with Aaron and I. All right, welcome everybody to yet another episode at the Heart of Man. Today, I'm incredibly excited to have Aaron Binning on the podcast. So just a few things about Aaron. He's an experienced social worker, educator, and youth mentor, and he spent numerous years focusing on supporting at-risk youth, people in the UK before actually moving to Bali, where he founded this initiative called The Road. And this initiative aims at empowering and as well educating young men through experiential learning. So with that, I just want to welcome you, Aaron, to the podcast.
Thank you, Alex.
So to start off, I would love to just maybe begin by asking you, what would the listeners and I need to know about you that made this feel really important to you?
Well, I think the first thing is that when I reflect on myself and look back in hindsight, I've always played this role of counsel within my family environment, in my social circles.
Kind of being like a mediator?
A mediator, yes. a listener, someone who people feel comfortable to speak to and open up to. The amount of times that I've had people come to me and say, I've never really said that to anyone before, or, I can't believe that we're having this conversation and we only just met. When you hear that so many times, something starts to click, and that's always been an experience that I've had and something that's I've received from other people. So I guess that's one part of it. The other part is that I always felt that as a young man growing up in a very conservative white town in the UK, I always felt a little bit alienated and treated kind of differently on a racial front. That was quite apparent, and it was laughed and joked about quite a lot. So I always felt that I connected to the other vulnerable people around me, especially at school, and I just felt a deep kind of compassion from a young age for the other people who were in that similar kind of vulnerable situation. And for some reason, I always had an amount of resilience to push through that, even though I felt it on a deep level, on a heart level. When I look back on it, I was always able to push through it and to find ways to reinvent or to grow, to push through. So I guess as a reference point to how I grew up and the culture and the environment, and definitely being in a very wolf-packy boys group as a friendship circle.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, there was no support. Everyone was out to get each other. It was competitive. It was all a competition.
Yep.
In England, we have the word banter, and it was ruthless. It was toxic. It was, one-upping each other constantly. And you would tread on each other to get to the validation or the laugh or the recognition or the girl or whatever it was. And that was all under the bracket of just, we're just having a laugh and we're just boys being boys and all that kind of stuff. But I just want to go back to your question, which was, about my upbringing and who I was as a young man. And I guess the other aspect is the role models that I had around me. I speak of my friendship circle and that wolf pack because that was who I was following and listening to. And there was a void there for me in terms of men in my life who I could use as models, who I could look at and I could kind of mirror and learn from. My dad was a provider in that very set way of going out in the morning and coming back late at night. And as long as there was food on the table and we had what we needed, then I think he felt like he had done his role in the parental kind of setup in my home. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. So there was not that nurturing from my dad. I was nurtured by my mom. And that's, again, apparent to me as a 33-year-old man today. It shows up in my relationships in particular that, maybe that I have this strong feminine essence and I'm still having to learn how to show up in my masculinity in a healthy way. So reconnecting with my father and not holding that resentment for him as I did for a long time in my younger manhood, and understanding where he came from and what his reference points were, and reflecting on his own story as a young man, being brought up as immigrants with, language barriers and cultural challenges and all this stuff, helped me to let go of a lot of that resentment from my dad, and just acceptance for who he is and how he's just a huge part of me being sat here today and being able to go through my own story and do my own learning and hopefully be able to pass that on to others.
Wonderful. Yeah, I would love to just pause here for a moment. I feel like
Sure.
you're saying already such valuable, insights into perhaps some of the challenges that as well a lot of the boys, as well in our modern society are going through. I heard you speak as well about kind of the underlying, I guess, flavor of competition that is among many boys, and that there is an absence of perhaps underlying connection. And I can definitely relate to that in my own experience. That understanding or idea around needing to one up each other or constantly comparing ourselves to each other in the sense of, oh, okay, I feel better than this guy. Now I feel superior. Or sometimes I see the man in front of me or the boy in front of me and feel like I'm less than, and as a result feel inferior. And so there is this constant game of needing to, be ahead of the other, but that actually denies or takes us away from actually truly being in connection and relationship to each other. Second thing I heard was a lot about just the vacancy perhaps of your father, perhaps physically and even emotionally. And I can very much relate to that in the sense that, especially like a few decades ago, like there was this understanding that as fathers, we hold this role of provision, and as long as we fill that role, we're kind of complete. And I think that was kind of like a complaint that I attempted to express and even bring to my own father at times when I felt his absence. But it was something that he was never able to understand, because he personally as well grew up in poverty.
Yeah.
And the only thing that, was at his highest priority was giving me the life that he never had, right? So I think there was a bit of that disparity of him not understanding that. And, I just want to acknowledge him in the sense of like what he did, and ultimately, the hurdles that he had overcome as a result to give me what, he never had. And I'm, forever grateful for that. But I cannot deny as well kind of how his absence had as well an impact on me, I would like to just maybe pivot into what got you into wanting to start the road, and as well, how did that journey begin for you as you moved to Bali?
Sure. So I came to Bali very much on a whim, a gut feeling, which I followed and brought me here. And it just so happened that 2 weeks after I landed on the island, COVID became a thing, and there were lockdowns, and the world, well, we all know that story. And what I came for was time and space, really. I was 29 years old. I was very conscious of which chapter in my journey I was at and what was to come in my 30s.
What was that for you?
Well, I knew that I had this narrative up until that point of this program, I'll call it, of a lost boy program, where I was just still channeling the essence of my 17-year-old self, essentially, and kind of escaping all responsibility and commitment. And I was very conscious of that. And purpose was still something I hadn't really found a way to channel that in a way that spoke to me, in a lifestyle that spoke to me. I've bounced in and out of England over the past 15 years, mainly because I feel like I don't show up as the best version of myself when I'm in the UK for whatever reason, whether it's the weather or the culture or the people I'm surrounded by, combination of all those things. So I came looking for time and space, and that's exactly what I got when I arrived, landed in Ubud, had an online job teaching English to Chinese kids. And that was just my vehicle to survive the COVID pandemic. But I also had a lot of time to reflect on what it is that I wanted to create. And I don't think I would have ever been able to do that in England, just because of all of the barriers to entry on doing this kind of stuff. And I'm not sure how it would have been received, but I started to create this idea in my head about a program that started for young people, which combined my experiences as a young man and also the skills and tools that I had learned through the 4 years of social work in the UK, and just started to connect those things and think about what would really work for young men at this point. And this was during a time when masculinity was kind of under the radar. The Me Too movement was going on, and that was prevalent in the media. And there was a lot of conversation around men in power and masculinity. And then, so that was how it kind of grew from that, from working with young people. And then it transformed into, I'm going to focus with boys because that's what I can connect to more. And that's what resonates with me. And that's, if I'm going to be having these kind of conversations around sexuality or masculinity or relationships, then I need to be able to show up as authentically as I can.
Right.
And to be able to share from my own experience of that with these boys and these young men that I'm sitting with. So at the start, we fast forward now to March 2021, been in Bali for 1 year, and I've kind of built this idea vaguely around what it is that I want to offer to the community. And with the help of and the support of my friends and the community, I kind of put this idea out the road. And very quickly, there was an amazing response. And I had, like 20 boys, 25 boys, 2 or 3 groups very quickly.
What do you believe made this initiative so interesting for people? What is it that, you were doing, or what problem were you solving for them that, what challenge was there that they were actually looking to solve?
I think at the time there was this shift going on globally around masculinity, and boys at home repeating narratives and rhetoric around certain people in the media. And, this idea around toxic masculinity was coming to the surface, and it was reaching homes, and mothers in particular were coming to me and voicing like serious concerns about some of the things that their boys were talking about. And
could you provide some examples?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of the Andrew Tate phenomenon that was coming to surface, and the army of young men that he recruited alongside him. And I could repeat some of the things which particularly mothers told me, but some pretty rough excerpts of these boys just repeating the most outrageous statements and comments about women and sexuality and money and materialism.
So it sounds to me like the challenge that was present was that these young boys were receiving these influences that were ultimately harmful to them, and there was potentially an absence of proper guidance around what it actually means for them to, step more into adolescence and potentially even later into adulthood. And they were seeking for role models that were perhaps not as extreme, such as Andrew Tate, but actually offers a much more integrated model.
Sure, totally. And I feel that this kind of vocabulary that was becoming more popular and apparent, but also a lot of risky behavior. Mm-hmm. I think there's something about Bali which allows a lot more freedom than you would have in the US or the UK or in Europe. And as I've gone on this journey, I've started to understand that being on this island in particular, and the demographic of families and the environment, the freedom that a 13, 14, 15-year-old gets to ride scooters, and, you know, they can go into the shop and they can buy alcohol, and there's, you know, there's drugs around and there's clubs. And I think that also feeds into what I'm doing. And one of the issues that is basically being addressed here. A lot of families come to Bali with this dream, and in my experience, in my conversations that I'm having with parents, they're quite surprised when they learn of, you know, what's possible and how easily accessible certain things are, and, you know, the lack of kind of regulation around anything really.
Yeah.
So, you know,
what I'm hearing here is that there's an absence of guardrails, let's say, for these young boys, and a lack of structure and perhaps even order that is especially needed, you know, as a boy. And I'll speak as well from my own experiences that at that time, I'm perhaps still, or I was forming still my own internal value system, my own sense of what morals are, what ethics are. And it's very natural that, you know, at that time that we don't necessarily know that, you know, and especially when testosterone, let's say, comes online for boys, it's quite common for us to get more into risk-favored behavior, right? We're testing the boundaries, we're challenging ourselves, which of course can be really healthy. But if we don't have proper guardrails to support and guide and protect us as we learn to wield, you know, this new aspect of us, that can become incredibly harmful.
Certainly. And I see that it feeds back to what I said about the wolf pack mentality that I grew up with back in England. And I see the same thing here.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to create is a space for these boys and these young men to actually take the mask off and unarmor and see strength in vulnerability, because there's a huge blockage for a young man to be able to come in to a space with their peers and to speak, you know, honestly and openly about their personal world, their internal world, their feelings, their emotions, their experiences, their family setup. And what I've seen is huge growth and impact when it just takes one young man to have the courage to authentically speak up about something. And it's like a domino effect. You know, that peer-to-peer modeling is like the most powerful thing in what I'm seeing and what I'm doing. I can do so much, but I'm still the authoritative figure who's trying to create a certain experience. But as soon as one person in the group actually takes the mask down and speaks really from the heart, then it just changes the whole dynamic of what's going on, from something linear between me and them to actually a much more dynamic thing going on between these young men who are suddenly feeling safer to express themselves.
Yeah. So I'd love for you to just paint the picture for us around the type of setting that you bring these boys in. From my understanding, you bring a group of adolescent boys together, and from my understanding, they're going through, I believe it's a 10-week program with you. Yeah, for our listeners, I would love to just hear what it is that you're creating for these young men.
Sure. It's evolved over the last 3 years.
Sure, I bet.
And literally in terms of the space that we use and how it looks and feels. And now we're actually just down the road, like at the Flow. We use the space upstairs, and that's a private space. The Flow is a restaurant, and we sit around a table, 6 to 8 young men, teenage boys, myself and a co-facilitator who is typically a young man who's been through the road program at some point and has expressed an interest to continue that work and to work with me. And I basically guide a conversation around some sort of life experience. So we could talk about masculinity, or we could talk about father-son relationship, or we could talk about love, or body image this week we've been talking about, social media, technology. So it's all of the aspects of the experience of being a young man in today's world, internally and externally, and the things which I feel are not being addressed and spoken to. They're kind of lying dormant beneath the surface. And the intention really is to speak to that, to show up myself authentically and vulnerably, because that's the only way I can build this and build and cultivate this trust with these groups. It's mostly about me showing up as Aaron and not as a teacher or a counselor or a doctor or a therapist. It's like, Aaron's here. He's going to be open and honest with us. He's going to share with us. And what I've found is once I've made that connection with them, these young men start to feel really comfortable to actually talk about the things that they're going through.
Yeah.
And we sit there for 2 hours. Sometimes, I still go into sessions today and feel a little bit anxious about, am I going to be able to talk about these topics for these boys for 2 hours? But I can honestly say that I've never had a session where I've cut short or it's fell silent.
I want to backtrack for a moment here, and just to bring a bit more of a context. You mentioned that there is like a number of topics that stay rather under the hood and are more dormant. First of all, I'm wondering, what are some of the challenges that are present for these boys as they begin the program with you? What are the topics that are not being discussed that you see as incredibly important? And I guess the first thing that I'm hearing is that these boys feel like they can't openly share, or that there is maybe an absence of safety of really revealing their experience. Is that the case? And if so, what else is there for these boys?
Well, that's certainly a case. That's certainly the case. And the main problem that's being solved here is that they simply just don't have the space in their family and social setting to actually have a focused conversation around what's happening for them and what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. On a very broad umbrella, that is what's going on. Actually, I would say that the topics and the content that I bring to the sessions are secondary. The most powerful thing for these young men is to have a space in their weekly routine where they know that they can bring something in. And I encourage them to bring in their own experiences and challenges or things they want to celebrate with each other. It's not necessarily about problems. It's not always about fixing. It's about connecting. It's about showing up as your true self and being able to express that in the most authentic way that you possibly can. So, I mean, there are often challenges that come up around, particularly like a lot of young men today, as I speak to them, they feel confused about how they're supposed to show up as young men because of all of the narrative around the toxicity and all that kind of stuff that's in the media. And they don't feel comfortable to be able to show up as their true masculine self because for fear of being judged.
Yeah.
So that's one of the main challenges around that. And they just want validation and recognition and to know that it's okay to show up in that way and to, that's not them being, trying to think of a better word than toxic, but that's not them doing something wrong or showing up in an unhealthy way.
Yeah, man, I really, really like that. And as well, feeling kind of more as well into my own adolescent self. I definitely kind of see a bit of a disparity. I actually had a guest on recently. His name is James Mattingly. And he described it beautifully in the sense that we have these kind of two sides, these two stories around don't be too soft but as well, don't be too masculine. And so they're kind of like these two sides that are screaming at each other: be vulnerable, cry, express your feelings. The other side is, no, suck it up, move on, push through, all of that. And it's like incredibly confusing, because within all of us, there is this innate desire to belong. It's an innate desire to be accepted and to be loved for who we are. But if we're receiving these very opposing sides, like, who the fuck are we supposed to be? You know, that's kind of like my main concern around that. And as you said, there is particular qualities, there's particular aspects that are asking and longing to be expressed. But then the question occurs, is it safe for me to do that? Will that aspect of me be accepted? And that I see is kind of like one of the challenges. I personally believe another like big problem is just this whole term around toxic masculinity, and bringing those two words together, toxic masculinity, because it suggests that there is something about being a man and being masculine that is rotten, that is disgusting, that should be shoved away. And I personally don't stand by that at all, because to me, as I see it, you know, what is being referred to as toxic suggests or speaks actually a lot more into adolescent, immature behavior, especially from men, where there has been an absence of initiation, an absence of actually truly stepping into maturity and adulthood. And, you know, of course, this is something kind of I want to weave more a little bit into, but this is kind of like one of the things that's most alive for me around this conversation. And I think this is kind of like a big challenge, where I see that a lot of boys don't necessarily know where to place themselves in the culture, in the society.
I really feel like these young men, more than anything, just want to connect, like you said, to belong. And I know that so many of these young men that I speak to, before they came onto this program, they did not have a space to express themselves and to connect with their brothers in a brotherhood.
Yes.
And something you'll hear me speak about is the idea that becoming a man is a emotional journey that is best shared with brothers. And not having had that myself growing up, and then learning what it meant to support each other and to be able to have role models around you, and how much that's helped me later on in life, I can see now very clearly that that can be transferred into, you know, the teenage years, and just giving them that platform to work from in terms of what healthy friendships to start with look like, and being able to actually support each other rather than compete the whole time. There's a huge shift in terms of the young male dynamic and, you know, your day-to-day experience. So
I'm curious to hear, what is it about that, the sense of building connections, learning how to build proper friendships, like really having a group of brothers along your side. What is it about that you see as so important?
Well, I feel like we're all having this experience. And especially in the masculine archetype, it's not considered normal to connect on the experiences that we're having and the internal landscape that we're navigating. So the moment that someone actually takes off that armor and shows their true self, it feels like a huge thing for a young man to do that, because it's such a huge barrier to doing that. There's such a huge judgment around that. And then the learning, the power, the wisdom is in that moment, seeing that actually someone else is connecting to that. Because it's the most scary thing to do for a young man, is to like say, actually, you know, I had a real struggle with X or Y or Z, or I was feeling this or that. And then to to have your peers hold you physically or metaphorically, or to hear you and to see you in that and to resonate and connect on that, I think there's huge benefit in that, because it changes your whole perspective in terms of how you can show up. And again, you spoke a little bit about your last guest speaking about the balance between the softness and the masculine. And something I speak about with these young men and that they really connect to and lights them up is that I'm not trying to encourage them to become these soft, sensitive men that are continuously talking about their emotions and, constantly wrapped up in their feelings. I'm actually encouraging them to become more self-aware, to understand what it is they're working with, to support each other, so that when it comes to that point, when they find the thing that lights them up, the purpose, the relationship, or the job, or the creation that they want to create in the world, they have the support and they have the self-awareness to be able to drive forward into that, having done some of this work, and having built relationships with each other, having built an understanding of themselves a little bit more than I believe they would have had they not gone on a program like this. So the intention really is to make them feel and be more equipped to take on those challenges and those tasks, and to be able to execute.
Yeah.
Because I think that is, the more I learn and the more I experience, I think that is really what speaks to men on a masculine kind of level, is that they really want to just step into action and drive forward and create. And we spoke earlier a little bit about my journey of kind of learning to come out of my head and into my body, and what that looks like for me, literally. And it looks like me, serving others. It looks like me doing Muay Thai or going surfing or going for a walk on the beach, and using the energy and the vibration that comes out of that to then channel that into creation or service or whatever it is that I want to do, rather than ruminating in my head and kind of creating this. I mean, when I'm ruminating in my head and I'm too much in my head, I'm feeling stuck, and I'm feeling my energy being absorbed into that space rather than what can be channeled through my body, really.
Yeah.
So,
all right, I'd love to just pause here for a moment and just maybe reflect a few things back that I'm really hearing. And the first thing that really stands out for me is kind of placing the value around self-awareness, and as well knowing themselves internally, but not necessarily more from this place of like staying stuck there or wallowing in that, but also using that as an access point towards deeper agency, towards deeper confidence, and as well towards deeper action, which, this is one of the things that I told you before we started rolling, that one of the biggest things that I see with a lot of men that, come to me for coaching is that it's not so much that, like, when a man comes with a challenge, sure, there may be emotions around it, and there is an importance and a necessity to speak about those. If there is something there that has been repressed and suppressed and unacknowledged. Simultaneously, the biggest desire that they really have is to feel competent, is to feel like they have a sense of agency over those. They want to feel that. They want to believe and have a strong conviction that they can move forward in their lives. And if they don't necessarily have that skill with their emotions, from my experience, what I often observe is a repression or just stuffing it down, because it's like, well, I don't know what the hell to do with that. Let me just stuff that down and let me just keep going. However, that does create a lot of challenges if you accumulate that over a few years, decades, whatever. And I saw that as well in my own life. Now, if we are able to cultivate a sense of awareness, as you said, but then as well, cultivate a sense of intelligence and skill to move through our internal landscape, it actually can be a guiding system. Like, that's really the way I see it. Is it's an internal compass that shows us where we're off, or what's really needed, and it actually supports us in the actions that we want to take. So I really love that importance you're placing on balance here. And if we don't do that, as you said, we kind of step more into the headspace, because that's the only thing that we know. And that's the only thing that after a time feels safe, right? And we actually step away from that connection to ourselves. But and the reason why I'm speaking about this is because I really believe that where this shows up the most is in our relationships. Because if there's an absence of connection to ourselves, we will naturally feel disconnected in relationships. And that's really where I want to just emphasize, I guess, the importance as well, what you're speaking into.
Thank you. Yeah. And you talked about the balance there, and I just want to speak a little bit to the fact that the road, this program, it's not solely about 8 young men sitting around a table and talking. There, as it's evolved and grown, I realized the importance of coming into our bodies and overcoming challenges physically.
Why is that important to men or young boys?
Well, I think it's a reference point, and it's proof that I think resilience is the word. I think building resilience, being able to climb a volcano, surfing the big wave, building a fire, sleeping out under the stars, they're all experiences, and they take a certain level of discomfort to step out of that. And the amount of boys that I take to the beach and just to make a campfire, and they've never done that. And they live in Bali, and I'm like, wow, you guys are just, you're just in your little cocooned comfort zones at home. And they talk to me about that, and their screens and their nice bedrooms with the air conditioning on. And I'm just shocked when I take them to the beach and we have a campfire, and, we roll around on the sand, and they're like, they love it. Like, they love it, but they've never done it. So that's really important as well, to be able to play, to be able to, roughhouse a little bit, and to just come into their bodies and feel what they're capable of. And, I've taken groups of boys up Mount Agung, which is the highest peak here, and highest volcano here in Bali. And that's a serious challenge. But speaking to the group of young men that I took after that, they were just like, that's the biggest accomplishment of my life. Like, I've never challenged myself in that way. I've never tested myself and overcome. And there were points when I felt like I was going to give up, and I wanted to give up, or I was going to be sick, or I just wanted to stop. So that as a metaphor and as an example, as a reference point on your kind of mental CV of what you're capable of and how you can push through, I think it translates into other parts of your life. And yeah, resilience is one of my favorite words that I talk about so much with these young men, because I think it's something that we all need, because there is no easy path out there. There's no finish line, really. And I talk to them about, I just talk very openly and honest to them about, there will always be work to be done. There will always be some sort of suffering. There will always be uncertainty in some way. And I wish someone had told me that when I was 15, because there I was thinking I was going to be an investment banker, and I was going to get my money, and then everything was going to be cool and fine and dandy when I was 40. But, you can speak to, I'm sure you've had the most successful people that you meet, people on this island, and you still see that they're still going through their own challenges. We don't hear that story enough, I feel. And these young men are they're looking online, and they have these idols and these role models, and they're seeing all the material, but they're not seeing what's behind the scenes. And you know, more and more we're being exposed to this idea, this idealism of what it means to be successful, or what it means to be a man, or what it means to be an adult. But I feel it's a hugely skewed representation of what the reality of life is likely to be like.
Yeah, I love that. The big sense I'm really getting, having had this conversation now for almost an hour, is really that you're really helping them kind of guide and direct them in those conversations that they will naturally ask themselves. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be successful? How do I really move and direct myself through this life? And there's various ways that one can do that. One of those that I personally just absolutely love is this sense of preparing men or young men for discomfort, and recognizing that pain, discomfort is an innate aspect of life, right? And we can do everything that we can in order to protect ourselves from that. We can coddle ourselves away from that. However, that actually takes us away from cultivating a sense of confidence with the discomfort, and knowing and trusting our own ability to move and lean through it. And I love that you're actually bringing these young men through challenging experiences. Something that I always like to say, I'm sure, for the regular listeners, they'll have heard that before, but I personally believe we as men thrive in challenge because we get to know ourselves in realms of challenge. We get to know who we are as men, and as well what we're capable of. And that gives us a sense of confidence and a sense of agency that whatever happens, regardless of what happens, we can move through it and we can lead ourselves in our lives. And that's really what I see.
And I totally agree. And I believe that that's an experiential knowledge, an experiential
100%.
wisdom. And you can read all the books and watch all the podcasts
Right.
until you actually experience that and embody that. You never really know.
Yeah. What are some of the common discussion points that you see, and maybe challenges that you see among these boys? So, we spoke about, this uncertainty around what it means to be a man. You spoke about screens. I'm wondering what else is there. One of them that's kind of alive for me right now is pornography. I'm wondering if that is kind of like a topping point for a lot of these boys. And if not, what else is out there that these boys are actually challenged with?
It's definitely, the pornography is definitely something that comes up for sure. And I regularly talk about that with young men. I'm actually quite surprised by the number of them who feel that they are struggling with it. A lot of the young men tell me that they got it under control, like they're watching and using it, but actually they don't feel like it's a problem for them. So yeah, porn is one. Laziness, lack of purpose, huge ones. A lot of pressure from parents to deliver academically. I recently had a week of conversations with boys and young men in groups about father-son relationship, which is always quite a
Tell us more about that.
Quite a heavy topic, actually, because a lot, we're all feeling that pressure to live up to our parents and our fathers' expectations, and the pressure to be the man or the son that our father always wanted us to be.
So would you say that these boys are feeling pressured to live up to their father's expectations, but as well longing for his recognition?
100%. But I feel like in this particular week of discussions that I had, it wasn't that. There was great benefit to them hearing each other talk about that. But there were also instances, it was the instances where there were young men who were alienated or estranged from their fathers, or had even lost their fathers in some cases, where I feel the boys who had, strong relationships with their fathers. They heard the stories of the boys who didn't have fathers who were present in their lives. And that was actually where a lot of the power and the compassion and gratitude came in, because I think it's easy for us to just take it for granted that our dad's present, and we become resentful, or we don't make the most of that relationship. So what I saw in that week was that a lot of young men who have awesome father figures in their lives, realizing that actually what a blessing that is, because there are young men sitting around the table who have lost their dads and who, don't have their dads in their day-to-day lives, don't have communication. So the conversation around living up to your dad's expectations and all those kind of things was kind of the guiding of the conversation. But the actual wisdom of where those conversations took us was that, just the realization that our dad won't always be there. Not everyone has that. And that we might be actually taking that for granted when when you hear the story of estranged parents or divorce, or, all these stories that kind of go on behind the scenes, behind closed doors.
Yeah.
A lot of these boys feel like they're already brothers and they're best friends and they hang out every day. And then they sit and have these conversations with each other and they really open up, and it's like, wow, we never actually talked about that, bro, That's one of the most powerful, beautiful things that I see on a weekly basis, is young men really talking to each other about things that they've never really had the courage or felt comfortable or safe to do, and how that connects them and bonds them.
When they feel like, let's say they do open up about the treasure box of, all the challenges that they have, and they feel that sense of connection and bonding, how does that impact their lives as a result? Have you witnessed, what have you witnessed among those boys?
I witnessed deep connection and friendship, bond. I've witnessed it in front of my eyes in terms of boys who have come together that didn't know each other and now hang out and connect on a deeper level. I've witnessed a vast improvement in vocabulary and ability to express. I've witnessed boys come to me and tell me that the people in their lives, whether it's mothers, fathers, girlfriends, tell them that they've changed, that that they've changed in their ability to communicate. They've changed in their ability to empathize and be compassionate and to listen. I've had young men come into the groups at very low points with very specific kind of issues going on socially or personally, and stay on the program for longer than 10 weeks and come out of it saying that, without that space, they would have found it a lot more difficult to have pushed through or kind of shifted out of that low point that they were in. So I think, again, so many times I've seen young men have the courage to speak up, and that peer-to-peer modeling of seeing someone your own age, of a same demographic, sharing a challenge or being vulnerable. To me, that's where the real power is.
Yeah.
Because it gives strength.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it comes back to that experience of feeling it inside of your body when you speak vulnerably to something, and you either connect with it with someone else, or you walk away feeling a little bit lighter and a little bit more authentic and seen and heard. And I think that's why these boys keep coming back. And when I started this program, I was had no idea if it was going to connect to them, if they were going to come back next week, if they were going to walk out of the sessions. But now I feel like I understand exactly what it is that we're providing in these spaces. And yeah, it's a very beautiful thing, and I'm very grateful, and I feel very blessed to be able to share these moments with these young men 3 or 4 times a week. And yeah, I mean, I'm learning along the way,
right,
the whole time too.
Yeah. I love hearing this. Yeah, man. Yeah, thanks for all these shares. As we're winding down the conversation, I just wanted to provide the space potentially for as well parents who are listening, and as well, have young boys and adolescent boys that are stepping into manhood very soon, and perhaps they have struggles, challenges. I guess we as well started this conversation by prefacing we're both not fathers. However, I'm curious to hear from your experience of the work that you do, what would help those boys? What is it that they really need? And I want to just provide that for you for a moment, just to speak to those parents of what you believe would be supportive for those kids.
Yeah, again, it feels like a difficult question for me to be able to give advice on parenting. But what I see that these boys really want more than anything is acceptance, and to be allowed to make mistakes, and to be guided and held through those experiences. So there's a feeling for me that a lot of these young men are pushing back away from their mothers and their fathers because they feel like they're constantly being watched or surveilled, and they just want to have that ability to go and explore and push boundaries. And for me, I feel like that's something that, there's an over-parenting thing going on at the moment. And I don't know if it's because of fear or COVID or whatever it is that happened, but there's been a shift. And, particularly we talked about testosterone in young men and hormones, and they really want to be able to explore and to be trusted to explore and to make their mistakes and to be trusted that they'll learn from their mistakes. Because if you tell a young man that you can't do this and you can't do that, he's going to try and do it anyway. And I feel like being supported in making those mistakes and taking those calculated risks, learning through the discomfort or the failures or the falls, and knowing that your parent is still going to be behind you, kind of supporting you through that, and to help you to learn and grow from those experiences, whether it's with relationships or whether it's with bikes or substances or parties and adventures, all these things that every young man is really seeking inside of them. Do they feel safe to do that? Should they feel safe to do that? I just think they need to be supported. I think that is an expression. I think we'd rather have a generation of young men who are willing to take risks and are willing to explore and push through into discomfort, rather than a generation of young men who are so scared that they don't try anything.
I love this. Yeah, I think this is, I'm so happy that you touched on this. And I think it's such an incredibly important aspect just to name how as well important it is to allow them to explore, to take risks and to experience life and to try things out and to maybe even fuck up and learn from their mistakes, right? And I would say, it creates confidence over time. And, this is such an innate skill that we need to as well have as we step into adulthood. I mean, like if you just think about what it is that we're doing, whether it's me with this podcast or you with this organization, like we're taking risk, right? So we have to access those same qualities that we already innately feel as boys. However, if we were never encouraged in that, we're not, the story that gets implied is that we can't trust ourselves, right? And I would say, like, I would like to maybe just preface that with just a personal example that came up as I heard you speak. I remember an incident when I was 14, when I was still living in Canada at that time, and I was going through this woodworking class. And one of the tasks for the semester was to build a wooden clock, and something I was really excited about. And my dad, from profession, he's a carpenter, and he's masterful with his hands and wood, and he like truly understands it. And at times I brought this project like home, and I remember, like speaking with him about it, but I remember still kind of the pain that was present for me when I saw and observed that he fixed some of the things where I kind of messed up. And like that was a pain point that I actually only acknowledged maybe a few years ago. And the story that was created in me was, I can't trust myself, or it's not okay for me to fuck up. And that was definitely something I had to just reconcile and unwind and really recognize, you know what? I can take risks, and I can fuck up, and I can just go for it. And if I fail, I'll learn from it, and that was just maybe a personal example here that definitely stuck out with me, that speaks to this phenomenon of taking risk and how it as well generates a sense of confidence in ourselves as a result.
The seeds are planted, were planted a long time ago for, our perspectives and our behaviors and our patterns and our programs. It's really interesting to hear boys speak about these kind of moments which they become more aware of. When, like you just shared, I often share very similar kind of anecdotal stories from my own experience, and it allows them to be aware of, what's happening for them or what's shaping them in different ways. But yeah, come back to those risk-taking behaviors, come back to that discomfort, and that being our baseline, where our baseline is.
I think as well, just the bottom line, if I can just jump in here, is that these boys as well want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be recognized, fundamental underlying needs that are so important to us, to all of us, not just boys, to feel accepted and to feel this underlying sense of belonging. And, if there's an absence of that, that definitely creates a sense of isolation and creates this whole kind of like lone wolf phenomenon that's present for so many, men, and I think that's kind of like as well a big thing that I'm really hearing from, from this entire conversation that we've had, that these boys don't feel safe to actually be themselves. And you're providing a space where they get to lean into that fear of their experiences, or maybe the conditioning, the story that they've been told about who to be, and they get to overcome that and then actually find a new narrative and actually just be authentic and actually recognize it's safe when I'm authentic.
You just said it for me.
Oh man. All right. I love this. Well, I just want to close off or come to wrap up the conversation. And first of all, I just want to acknowledge you, Aaron, for coming on this podcast, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your insights and your experiences with these young boys. As mentioned, this is kind of like a first for me to bring into this podcast, but I believe it's such a valuable and essential conversation to have. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experiences and really acknowledge you for the work that you do. I think it's so essential. I think it's so important.
Thank you so much.
You're doing an incredible thing with the road. So I appreciate that, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome, man. Well, I would love to just wrap it up with a closing question, which is the premise for this podcast is called Heart of Man. And the idea behind it was, that heart space, that connection to my own heart, to my own authentic expression was kind of that thing that I was most disconnected from growing up. And I really leaned on over the past few years to reconnect to that and recognize as well just the beautiful aspects of it. And so I'm curious to hear what enlivens you most in your heart and what drives you at your deepest core.
I think I spoke about this recently with a couple of friends, actually, when something that really lights me up on a heart level is seeing two people who firstly did not know each other and were not connected in any way come together and be able to form a connection and find similarities, or to connect on their own passion and their own truth and their own wisdom and vulnerability. Something in that which has always lit me up, which has always given me hope, I guess, in the context of everything else that's going on in the world. Just that human connection, really,
Nice.
is something that's always inspired me. The ability for humans to be compassionate and to inspire each other. It speaks to, I guess, the wisdom and the adventure that is life. And I believe it's important to be optimistic and to see those expressions of the human spirit. Yeah.
Thank you, brother. Where can our listeners find you?
You can find me on Instagram, which is at The Road Bali. And we also have our website, which is www.theroadbali.com.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll make sure as well to put those handles in the descriptions.
Thank you.
For all you listeners, thank you for checking in today. Thank you as well for being a part of this conversation. I really hope as well that you got value from Aaron and I. And if you have any questions coming up around our conversation or discussion points, feel free as well to connect with both of us, and we'd love to hear from you. And until next time, thank you for listening to this episode. Your time and attention is truly appreciated. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for my upcoming episodes. And in case you know somebody who would find this episode helpful, I encourage you to pay it forward. Finally, if you've personally been receiving value from the show, one way you're able to support this podcast is by leaving a 5-star rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Not only does this help more people find the show, but it also supports me in bringing more incredible guests on for the future. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and until next time, signing off.